The church bells in Nzuri Heights were still ringing for my father, Chief Sul Kamara, when Zara, my wife, stepped close at the foot of his casket. She pressed a brown envelope into my hand and whispered, "It's better to end things now." Her words cut sharper than the cold air in the church. Cameras flashed, aunties gasped, cousins pretended they hadn't heard. I opened the envelope and saw divorce papers resting on top of the white coffin flowers. My knees felt weak, but I locked my jaw and swallowed the burn in my throat. I looked up and found Kwesi, my best friend, standing a few feet away, his eyes fixed anywhere but on me. The choir's voices rose, the pallbearers adjusted their grip, and I kept my face still. My father deserved dignity in his last moments, not a scandal. I didn't sign. I slid the envelope into my inner pocket and told myself I would not break here, not in front of the flashing cameras, not in front of my family. Whatever war Zara had brought to my father's funeral, I would fight it later. For now, I stood beside the coffin, my body cold, my heart heavier than the bells that still echoed through the church. The only thing I could give my father now was silence. But deep inside, I promised myself that the silence would not last forever. One day soon, she would regret choosing this moment to strike. The air at Ikari Ridge was heavy with dust and whispers. It felt like the Harmattan wind itself carried people's words from mouth to mouth. I could hear them even if I pretended not to. Some said I was never enough for Zara. Some said my father's company, Kamara Blue Line, was the real love in my life, and that my marriage had been more of a business arrangement than a union of hearts. I kept my eyes on the grave, but their words kept crawling into my ears. My mind replayed moments I had been ignoring for months, Zara coming home late without explanation, the new perfume that didn't smell like anything I had ever bought her, and Kwesi's jokes about my long hours that always seemed to land with a hidden edge. The burial moved on around me. The shovels clinked against stones as they threw the last handfuls of earth over my father's coffin. When the ground was finally smoothed and the mourners began to drift away, my mother, Hawa, came to me. Her grip was soft but strong as she held my hand and told me to go home. Her voice was calm, but I could see the worry hiding in her eyes. I nodded, but I didn't move. When she left, I sat on a weathered wooden bench under the purple shade of the jacaranda trees. The scent of the flowers mixed with the dry wind, but I barely noticed. I pulled out the brown envelope from my inner pocket, switched on my small torch, and began to read the divorce petition carefully. The flickering light made the words seem to move on the page, but what struck me most was how wrong everything felt. The dates didn't match the events I remembered. There were accusations in there that sounded polished, rehearsed, almost like they had been read out loud many times before being written down. The more I read, the more the whole thing felt staged, not just the papers, but the moment she chose to give them to me. At my father's funeral, in front of family, cameras, and a friend who wouldn't look me in the eye. It was like a scene in a play, and I wasn't the writer, just the target. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was an audience somewhere, watching from a place I couldn't see, waiting for me to react in the way they had planned. I leaned back on the bench, staring up at the jacaranda branches swaying gently in the wind. The petals fell like slow purple rain, settling around my feet. Somewhere in the distance, a group of mourners laughed quietly, already moving on with their lives. But I couldn't move on yet. I didn't just lose my father that day, I had been handed a betrayal, wrapped neatly in an envelope. I closed the petition, slipped it back into my pocket, and sat in the growing darkness, letting the torchlight fade. My father had always told me that nothing in life happens by accident. If something feels too perfectly timed, it's because someone timed it. I knew then that Zara's move at the funeral wasn't just cruelty. It was strategy. And if she had a plan, I would need one too. The sun was slipping behind the rooftops of Nzuri Heights when I stepped out of St. Kafui Cathedral. The crowd had thinned after the burial, but the faint smell of incense still clung to the air. I was halfway down the church steps when I saw Counsel Amaran Chabling, my father's lawyer, waiting at the edge of the courtyard. She stood straight, her black coat buttoned neatly, her face calm but unreadable. When I reached her, she didn't waste time with condolences. In a low voice, she told me my father had left her strict instructions, sealed and private, that were only to be revealed after his burial. She said she needed me at her office at Jabari Court Chambers first thing in the morning. There was something in her tone that made me pause. It wasn't just formality. It felt like she had been expecting this day, this chaos, and had been standing quietly in the wings waiting for it to unfold. Her eyes held mine with a kind of steady warning. Then she leaned in slightly and told me not to speak to anyone until we met, and under no circumstances was I to sign anything, especially if it mentioned marital property. Her words landed heavy. She didn't explain further, and I didn't push. I glanced over her shoulder and saw Zara in the distance. She was walking toward Kwesi's black SUV. He leaned casually against the door, like they had all the time in the world. I watched her slide into the passenger seat, her face turned slightly toward him, the faintest smile playing on her lips. The SUV pulled away, its brake lights glowing red in the dimming evening. The red bled across the wet pavement, and for a moment, it looked almost beautiful, until I remembered what it meant. That was when I understood something I hadn't been able to put into words before. The worst thing about betrayal isn't the moment it happens. It's not the shock, not the anger, not even the humiliation. It's the way it can look so ordinary to everyone else. From across a parking lot, it was just two people driving away together. No one could see the knife still lodged between my ribs. Amara touched my arm lightly, bringing me back from my thoughts. She told me to go home, rest, and be at her chambers as soon as the sun was up. Her voice was calm, but I could tell she was measuring every word, as if even the shadows might be listening. I nodded, though I knew rest wouldn't come easily. As I walked toward my car, the church bells began again in the distance, softer now, like an echo of the morning. My father's funeral had ended, but something else, something far more dangerous, had just begun. And whatever was waiting for me in Amara's office, I had the feeling it would explain why she looked like a woman who had been holding on to a secret for far too long. The next morning, the sky over Nzuri Heights was pale and heavy, as if it knew the day would carry weight. I arrived at Jabari Court Chambers just after sunrise. The streets were still quiet, the city half asleep, but Amara was already waiting in her office. She didn't waste time on small talk. Instead, she reached into her desk, took out a small sealed flash drive and a thick folder, and placed them in front of me. She slid the flash drive toward me first. "Your father recorded this 2 weeks before he died," she said. Her voice was calm, but I could see in her eyes that she had been carrying this moment for a while. I plugged the drive into her laptop, and the screen lit up with my father's face. He looked thinner, his voice weaker, but his eyes were sharp as ever. He spoke slowly, every word deliberate. He reminded me that Blue Line had started as nothing more than a leaking canoe at Odogbo Pier, and that he had learned early how to spot a hole in a boat before it sank. He said love without loyalty was a luxury he could never afford for me. He told me that if certain signs appeared, signs of betrayal, theft, or a plot to strip me of what we had built, Amara was to activate a legacy trust that would protect Blue Line and reveal what had been happening behind my back. When the video ended, Amara pushed the folder toward me. It was heavy, the kind of weight that didn't just come from paper. Inside, I found a series of documents laid out like a trail. There were bank statements tracing strange transfers, charts showing movement of money between accounts I didn't recognize, and company registrations for names that meant nothing to me at first glance. There were screenshots of emails I had never seen and contracts I had supposedly approved but had no memory of. At the center was an audit map, lines and arrows connecting accounts, shell companies, and vendors in different cities. My eyes followed one dotted red line that ran straight from several Blue Line contracts to a name that froze me in place, A&K Bayoko Holdings. I stared at it, my mind turning over the letters. Amara watched me closely but said nothing yet. The map looked like something from a crime board in a detective's office, money moving in loops, numbers shifting like they were dancing just out of sight. Whoever had done this had been careful, but not careful enough to erase the path entirely. I closed the folder slowly, my heart beat loud in my ears. My father had seen something long before I did. He had known the storm was coming and had left me both a shield and a weapon. I realized then that the brown envelope Zara gave me at the funeral wasn't just bad timing. It was the start of a fight she thought I would walk into blind. But now, thanks to my father, I wasn't blind anymore. I was still staring at the audit map when Amara leaned forward, her voice low but firm, and said, A&K is not just any company. A&K stands for Amina and Kwesi. My heart kicked hard in my chest. Amina. It took me a second before I realized, Amina was Zara's legal name, the one she used only on certain official documents outside Nzuri Heights. My wife. My best friend. Their names hidden together in the title of a ghost company that had been quietly stealing from me. Amara went on, her words slicing the air clean. For the past 6 months, Zara and Kwesi had been moving money out of Blue Line through fake vendors, businesses that existed only on paper. They had even forged my digital approval for payments, using a cloned copy of my signature to make it look legitimate. Every transfer had been disguised, every step planned. They weren't just stealing, they were building a trap. She flipped to a section of the divorce petition and pointed to a paragraph buried deep in the legal jargon. It was a clause designed to freeze my Blue Line shares. They claimed misconduct on my part, misconduct they had invented. If the court believed it, I could lose control of everything my father built. I felt my hands curl into fists, but Amara's voice steadied me. She told me my father had seen this coming. Months before his death, he moved the majority of Blue Line shares into a trust, one with a unique condition. It would only unlock if my spouse filed for divorce within 30 days of his passing. The moment Zara handed me those papers at the funeral, she triggered that clause. Instead of freezing my shares, it froze her out. She had no claim to the company anymore, and every move she and Kwesi made under A&K Bayoko Holdings was now flagged for investigation. Amara didn't stop there. She told me she had already filed for an injunction to protect Blue Line and notified the Makuta County Court. Their accounts, their fake vendors, their shell companies, everything was now under watch. What they thought was the perfect plan had just turned into the perfect trap, and my father had built it long before his heart stopped beating. I sat back, the weight of it pressing into me. The betrayal was deep, but so was the foresight of the man who raised me. He had trusted me enough to leave me the tools to fight, even when I didn't know a fight was coming. I thought back to Zara's calm face at the funeral, Kwesi's careful avoidance of my eyes, the way they probably believed I was already finished. But the truth was different now. The war they started wasn't over. It had just shifted. And for the first time since my father's coffin was lowered into the ground, I felt something other than grief. I felt ready. The rooftop bar at the Mariela Hotel was buzzing that evening, lit by golden lamps and the soft hum of people pretending not to watch each other. It was the kind of place where everyone carried their phone ready, because being seen here was part of the performance. I arrived with Amara by my side, her black suit sharp against the fading sky. 2 men followed quietly behind us, broad-shouldered, calm, and watchful. They didn't speak, but their eyes never stopped moving. Zara was already there, seated at a corner table with a view of the whole city. She looked perfect, as always, her dress immaculate, her hair shining under the lights, but her expression was all steel. Beside her, Kwesi sat with the nervous stillness of a man who had just realized the knife was pointing his way. I didn't bother with greetings. I placed my phone on the table, pressed play, and let my father's voice spill out, low but steady. His words about loyalty, betrayal, and the trust he had built wrapped around the table like smoke. Zara's eyes flickered only once, but I caught it. When the video ended, I slid the thick audit file toward her. I spoke slowly, clearly. I told them the dates of every fake transfer, the names of the ghost vendors, the accounts they thought no one could trace, the forged approvals with my cloned signature. Then I told Zara the most important part, that by handing me divorce papers at the funeral, she had triggered the clause that cut her out of Blue Line completely. Kwesi tried to laugh it off, reaching for his usual bluster, but before he could finish his sentence, the two quiet men placed another folder on the table. Inside were printed transcripts of recorded calls, screenshots of messages, and sworn statements from vendors who had been paid to play along. Each page was a nail in their coffin. Zara didn't shout. She didn't cry. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing as her mind began calculating the next move. I knew her well enough to see it, the fast, cold math of someone trying to survive a checkmate. Finally, she looked at Amara and asked, her voice low, "What will it take to make this go away?" Amara didn't hesitate. She said one word, sharp and heavy, a word that left no room for negotiation. It hit the table like metal on stone. Zara's jaw tightened, and Kwesi's face drained of its last bit of color. For a moment, the rooftop noise seemed to fade. All I could hear was my father's voice in my memory, telling me to smell the holes in the boat before it sank. I had found them. And now, I wasn't just patching them, I was making sure the people who made them never sailed again. By sunset, the city was already buzzing. The first posts came from rooftop bar regulars, grainy photos of me, Zara, and Kwesi at the Marilla Hotel, captions filled with guesses and gossip. Aunties sent voice notes that traveled faster than the evening wind, each retelling sharper than the last. Down at Bayoko Yard, Blue Line staff gathered in small circles, nodding as they finally understood why invoices had been looking strange for months. The court upheld Amara's injunction without hesitation. A and K's accounts were frozen, every coin locked in place. Kwesi vanished from the group chat he once filled with jokes, his last message left unanswered. Zara's silence stretched for weeks, until her lawyer finally sent over a formal apology. I didn't rush to reply. By then, I had moved my desk into my father's old office. The smell of his books and the open window looking out to the harbor gave me a quiet strength I hadn't felt in months. I set up the Sul Kamara Fellowship to help young coastal engineers, a way to honor the man who had built something from nothing. I took my mother to Izenia Falls so we could both breathe air untouched by betrayal. When I finally signed the divorce, it was on my terms. I placed the brown envelope back in my drawer, not out of anger, but as a reminder of the day everything changed. One morning, I stood at Odogbo Pier at dawn, watching the first boats move out to sea. This was where my father began, with a leaking canoe and a stubborn dream. I swore then that my children would never inherit scandal or betrayal, only blueprints, tools, and the courage to build something that would last.